Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for turning into another episode of the Curious Cat Crime Sunday. Today's episode is going to be on what is better known as the Slender Man Stabbing. Let me give you a little rundown on the story before we get into what Slender Man is and why he's important to this case. On May 31st, 2014, in Waukesha, Wisconsin, two 12-year-old girls, Anissa Wire and Morgan Geyser, lured their friend Peyton Lautner into the forest and stabbed her 19 times in an attempt to appease the fictional character Slender Man. Lautner crawled to a road where she was found by a passerby on a bike and was sent to the hospital. She recovered after 6 days in the hospital. Wire and Geyser were found not guilty by mental disease or defect and committed to health institutions for sentences of 25 to life and 40 years to life, respectively. After 7 years, Wire was granted early release and will be under supervision until the age of 37. Today's episode is going to be a little different. Instead of telling you about the place that this attempted murder took place, we're going to tell you a little bit about Slender Man. Slender Man is a fictional supernatural character that originated as a creepypasta internet meme created by Something Awful Forum. He is depicted as a thin, unnaturally tall humanoid with a featureless white face and head, wearing a black suit. Stories of the Slender Man commonly feature him stalking, abducting, and terrorizing people, particularly children. The Slender Man has become a pop culture icon, although he is not confined to a single narrative, but appears in many depictive works of fiction, typically composed online. Beginning in 2014, a moral panic occurred over the Slender Man after readers of his fiction were connected to several violent acts, particularly a nearly fatal stabbing of the 12-year-old girl in Waukesha, Wisconsin, which is what this story is about today. The stabbing inspired the documentary Beware of Slender Man, which was released in 2016. The Slender Man was created on June 10th in 2009 on a thread in Something Awful's internet forum. The thread was a Photoshop contest in which users were challenged to create a paranormal image. Forum poster Eric, excuse me if I say this wrong, Kunster, under the pseudonym Victor Surge, contributed 2 black and white images of groups of children in which he added a tall, thin, spectral figure wearing a black suit. Although previous entries had consisted solely of photographs, Surge supplemented his submission with a snatch of text, supposedly from Witness, describing the abduction of a group of children and giving the character name the Slender Man. The quote under the first photograph read, "We didn't want to go. We didn't want to kill them, but a persistent, silent, and outreached arms, horrified and comforted at the same time." The quote under the second photograph read, "One of 2 recovered photographs of the Sterling City Library blaze, notable for being taken the day of which 14 children vanished for what is referred to as the Slender Man, deformities cited as film defects by officials. Fire at library occurred 1 week later. Actual photograph confiscated as evidence." Because the Slender Man's fictional mythology has evolved without the official canon for reference, his appearance, motives, habits, and abilities are not fixed but change depending on the storyteller. He is commonly described as a very tall, thin, unnaturally long, tentacle-like arms, or mere tentacles, which he can extend to intimidate and capture prey. In most stories, his face is white and featureless, and occasionally his face appears differently to anyone who sees it. He appears to be wearing a dark suit and tie. The Slender Man is often associated with the forest and the abandoned location and has the ability to teleport. Proximity to Slender Man is often said to trigger Slender sickness, a rapid onset of paranoia, nightmares, delusions, and accompanied by nosebleeds. Early stories featured him targeting children and young adults. Some featured young adults driven insane in acts on his behalf, while others did not. And others claimed that investigating the Slender Man will draw his attention. The web series Marble Hornet established the idea of proxies, humans who fall under Slender Man's influence, through initially. though initially they were simply violently insane, rather the puppets of Slender Man. Marble Hornets also introduced the idea that the Slender Man could interfere with video and audio recording as well as the Slender Man symbol, which looks to me like a circle with an X through it, which and I'll put it up in this video, which became common trope for Slender Man fiction. Graphic violence and bloody horror are uncommon in the Slender Man mythos, with many narratives choosing to leave the fate of his victims obscure. Shira Chess noted that it is important to note that few of the retelling identify exactly what kind of monster the Slender Man might be, what his specific intentions are, and these points all remain mysterious and usually vague. Now that we know about Slender Man, let's get into the story. The stabbing took place at David's Park, a wooded area near Waukesha, Wisconsin, during a game of hide-and-seek on May 31st, 2014. The perpetrator, Anissa Weier, born November 10, 2001, and Morgan Geyser, born May 16, 2002, penned down Peyton Isabel Lautner, also known as Bella, a nickname used at the time of the crime, and stabbed her 19 times in the arm, legs, and torso with a 5-inch long or 13-centimeter blade. 2 wounds were to the major organs. One missed a major artery of her heart by less than a millimeter, and another went through her diaphragm, cutting into her liver and stomach. Weier and Geyser told Lautner to lie down where they would find help, but they did not get any upon leaving. Afterwards, Lautner dragged herself to a nearby road where she was found by a cyclist. The cyclist called 911 when he saw her. Around 5 hours later, Weier and Geyser were apprehended near Interstate 94 at Steinhaffel's furniture store after walking 4.9 miles. The knife used in the stabbing was in the bag they carried. Their goal was to meet Slender Man at his mansion called Slender Man Mansion in the Nicollet National Forest, roughly a 200-mile hike from their location. During their interview, Geyser was described as feeling no empathy, while Weier was described as feeling guilty for stabbing the victim, and both felt that the attack was needed to appease Slender Man. Lautner left the hospital 7 days after the attack. She returned to school in September of 2014. Court case and negotiations. Following the investigation, Geyser was charged with attempted first-degree homicide, a Class A felony, and Weier was charged with attempted second-degree homicide, a Class B felony. Due to the nature of the offenses, both Weier and Geyser were waived out of juvenile court and to be tried as adults. In 2017, Weier pled guilty to being a party to attempted second-degree homicide. A jury then found her not guilty by mental disease or defect. Geyser accepted a plea offer under which she would not go to trial and would be evaluated by psychiatrists to determine how long she would be placed in a mental hospital. She later pled guilty but was found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect and was diagnosed with schizophrenia, as mentioned above, from which her father also suffers. Weiser was sentenced to 25 years to life, an indeterminate sentence involving at least 3 years locked, confined, and involuntary treatment in a state psychiatric institute, followed by communal supervision until the age of 37. Geyser was given the maximum sentence of 40 years to life, an intermediate sentence involving at least 3 years locked confinement, in addition to involuntary treatment in a state psychiatric institution until complete resolution of symptoms or until the age of 53, which may happen first, followed by continued communal supervision, periodic revelations and reinstitutions, and further treatment as needed, as required by the sentence imposed. While Geyser will periodically have the opportunity to petition for her release from a mental state facility, in the future she will remain under institutional care for the duration of her sentence. During her trial, Geyser had been committed to the Winnebago Mental Health Institution and was the youngest patient there, as mentioned before. Going to be about Geyser's mental state. While growing up, Geyser experienced many hallucinations, such as ghosts, colors melting down the wall, and imaginary friends. One hallucination that occurred was often a man Geyser named It, whose body was the color of smoke and ink that stood behind her in the mirror and shifted around corners similar to that of Slender Man. After the arrest, Geyser's mother, Angie, stated she had become floridly psychotic. Correctional officers saw Geyser talking to herself often, pretending to be a cat, and keeping ants as pets. She saw unicorns as well as had continual conversations with Slenderman and other fictional characters such as Severus Snape. In the fall of 2014, Geyser was moved to Winnebago Mental Health Institution to determine if she would be competent to stand trial. The diagnosis Geyser on October 22, 2014, with early onset childhood schizophrenia. However, instead of treatment and medication, they focused on explaining the law to Geyser to prepare her for trial. Nearly half a year later, Geyser was found competent to stand trial. Geyser's schizophrenia was continually left untreated for 19 months, leading her to remain in a state of psychosis and out of touch with reality. In December, she was sent back to Winnebago and given antipsychotics, which later allowed Geyser to feel the remorse after clearing her mind. On March 23, 2016, Geyser was sent back to jail with the medication where she rapidly deteriorated. However, after a suicide attempt, Geyser was transferred back to Winnebago. In 2020, the appeals court rejected Geyser's petition to be retried as a juvenile. Her attorney argued that she should have been charged with attempted second-degree intentional homicide rather than first-degree, and argued that Geyser gave statements to investigators before being read her Miranda rights. He has petitioned the Supreme Court of Wisconsin to review the ruling. In early 2021, Wisconsin Supreme Court declined to hear the appeal. In the aftermath of the stabbing, the creepypasta wiki was blocked through the Waukesha School District. On Tuesday following the stabbing, Slenderman creator said, "I am deeply saddened by the tragedy in Wisconsin, and my heart goes out to the families and those affected by this terrible act." The administrator of the Creepypasta Wiki said that the stabbing was an isolated incident and that did not accurately represent the creepypasta community. He also stated that Creepypasta Wiki was a literary website and that they did not condone murder and satanic ritual. Members of the creepypasta community held a 24-hour live stream on YouTube June 13th to the 14th in 2014 to raise money for the stabbing victim. The administrator of the Creepypasta website said the purpose of the stream was to show that members of the community cared for the victim and did not condone real-world violence because they enjoyed fiction that contains violence. On August 12th, Governor Scott Walker issued a proclaim declaring Wednesday, August 13th, 2014, Purple Heart for Healing Day, and encouraged the people of Wisconsin to wear purple on that day to honor the victim of the stabbing. He also praised the strength and determination exhibited by Lautner during her recovery. The city of Madison, Wisconsin held a one-day Bratwurst Festival to honor Lautner on August 29th, several days before the victim's return to school. Hot dogs and bratwurst were sold to raise money towards the victim's medical costs. The event was run by over 250 volunteers and raised over $70,000 for Lautner. Just a little side note I found interesting, and I do remember these. There was an episode in Season 16's Law & Order Special Victims Unit called Glasgow Man's Wrath. It's loosely based on this event. And the Criminal Minds episode, The Tall Man, which is episode, Season 14, episode 5, that was also inspired by this story. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Curious Cat Crime Sunday. This has been Shelby and Olivia, and we hope you have a good week. Goodbye.